Today we'll be looking at Webquests. My name is Lane Sunwall. Lane, I'm here often, but I am the Learning and Technology Teaching Assistant at Learning Support Services, just over the street in Van Nuys. So today we're going to be looking at Webquests and how I have used them in my courses over the years, and specifically in this last one that I'm teaching just currently. So as I've been teaching over the last couple of years and the semester, really some of the problems I've seen pop up repeatedly in some of the assignments that I've had students do is that really the students are maybe not as interested in the subject as I am, right? I'm telling them what to do in the projects, and really the students aren't taking ownership of it. Right? I was having a tough time getting students to really define meaning in the assignment, really get interested in it. And so a lot of times the responses that I was getting was just enough for the student to get the grade they wanted. Right? If they wanted an A, they did a little bit more. But really you could tell they're just doing enough just to get up there. The group collaboration was often just really lame. Right? And assignments were often too constrained and without enough imagination. So in the course that I'm teaching right now is European imperialism from the mid-19th century to about late 1980s. We're talking maybe about European empires in Europe and how Napoleon III and the Austrian Empire were kind of fighting over Italy. And I was really interested in the Risorgimento, the unification of Italy, and talking about Cavour and Napoleon and Emmanuel. And we're really creating this exciting discussion about it, and the students were interested. But when I got to the assignment, okay, we've already heard about this, you already talked about this. This is just you kind of forcing us to keep on talking about realpolitik in the 19th century. So I was thinking, well, what can I do? Well, I need to improve this, right? So I really started to brainstorm a list of possible assignments that fit within classroom parameters, and really started doing some research into how to get students kind of more motivated in an assignment, in the projects that I'm having them do. So I started to redesign my projects. I started talking to other people in learning support services. I've read some books, some periodical journals. So really I was looking to increase student buy-in, get people more interested in the assignment, let them take ownership over themselves of the assignment. And so I was starting to provide, I was really finding that you needed to provide students with a range of choices for their assignments. So don't just tell them you're going to do this is how you're going to do it, these are the readings you're going to do. Maybe give them a little bit more flexibility and the power to explore areas within the confined boundaries, within the limitations that you set. Maybe give them a little bit more room to explore areas that are interesting to them without overwhelming them with choice. So instead of just telling them this is the project, this is the readings, give them a little bit more flexibility in what they're going to be talking about. Also, emphasize what they're doing and why, right? So I really talk about, oh, hey, you're in a history class, how are you going to use this stuff afterwards? Maybe talk about, you need research skills. Certainly a future employer is going to be looking for that as well. This is trying to be able to sift different claims of truth, right? Or in a group project as well, really talk about, in academia is the only time you're ever going to be working by yourself. Once you get out of the university, you're going to be having to work with coworkers and to work well with them as well. This is a time to develop those skills. So again, talking about how to create the project to really get the students to buy into it. And also another thing I found as well when I was doing the research is that students are more likely to work harder for each other than they are for you. And I guess maybe I'll use the example of one myself. When I was undergrad, I remember frequently if I was creating an assignment for other students, I would work really hard because I wanted to impress the students, other fellow students. I wanted to demonstrate that, hey, I knew what I was talking about. I wanted people to be, not bored when I was talking to them in front of in a classroom presentation. For the professor, all I wanted was the A. I didn't care what he thought about me. Right? I just wanted the grade. And so I was really seeing this as well within the literature and also with the students, is that they're really more likely to work harder for each other than just for me. Also, create a project that encourages team building. Again, we're talking about that a little bit before. And develop the collaboration skills. And also the other thing I was seeing as well, and I was hesitant because I'm not a super fan of bonus material, but I'm coming to reluctantly embrace it. Emphasize low stakes competition that maybe offers students a little bit extra incentive, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then also, just to reinform, making assignments their own. Let them demonstrate their own opinions. Have a stake in the argument that's being presented. So that brings us full swing back to Sting, back to Bono, circa 1984. So the class that I'm teaching, European Imperialism, 19th to 20th century European imperialism, and about any class worth its salt on European imperialism from the late 19th century is going to talk about new imperialism. It's going to talk about Kipling. It's going to talk about the white man's burden. So I created an assignment that was quite different than what I normally would do with Kipling. So this is taking place of a traditional exercise on Kipling, white man's burden, and new imperialism. So to give you a little bit more context, late 19th century, Europeans were increasingly thinking we need a rationale for why we're going out there and conquering the world. Kipling gives a really good excuse. He says, well, when you're going out to colonize India, you aren't out there for Indian goods or Indian wealth. You're out there to serve the Indians, according to Kipling. When you go out and colonize Africa, you aren't there to get the gold or the diamonds from South Africa or the rubber from the Congo. You're there to serve the Africans. It is your burden as a European state, it's your white man's burden to go out and lift up Africa, to lift up India, to give them food, to give them civilization, to educate them, to teach them. That's the white man's burden, according to Kipling in the 19th century. So I was taking that exercise, and instead I wanted to incorporate an assignment that gave students an opportunity to explore methods of empire in a more contemporary setting, to look at how some of those attitudes from Kipling we're continuing on today in neo-imperialism to aspects of NGOs in the late 20th century. So this is the assignment. Let's see how much we can actually read of it. All right, brilliant. So in this assignment then, I had the students read White Man's Burden. It's a poem. It was published in 1899. A short poem. I had them read the lyrics from Band-Aid. I also had them listen to the song. I put them through the same torture that I have to go through 2 months out of every year. So they listened to Band-Aid, and this is the introduction to the assignment as well. But then I gave them lots of flexibility in what some of the materials that they were reading. Okay? So I looked this stuff all up. And it was basically, so I had them read stuff from, they had a choice, they could read stuff from MTV, they had stuff they could read from Rolling Stones, from Billboard magazine, from BBC, from The Guardian, from The Independent, from, I think, what else, The Telegraph as well. So lots of different sources that I wouldn't normally be teaching about when I'm talking about 19th century imperialism. Right? I don't usually talk about MTV, 19th century imperialism. I don't usually put those together. It's kind of hard. But the class, but what I was trying to do there is demonstrate if you listen to the lyrics from Band-Aid, you kind of see a lot of ideas about Africa that are kind of stereotypical. There's no rain in Africa, right? There's a continent with no rain. Okay? There's no rivers. If you listen, no rain or rivers flow. I could be mistaken, but I kind of thought the Nile was in Africa, in Congo. No snow. Oh wait, there's Mount Kilimanjaro. Christmas, there's no Christmas in Africa. Wait, aren't there more Christians in Africa than there are in Europe? And oh wait, why would they have to know about Christmas? Is it essential for everyone in the world to be Christians and celebrating Christmas? So we were looking at that song and really starting to pick it apart and kind of look at some of the stereotypes of Africans in that song and how they're really quite similar to what Kipling was talking about in the 19th century, right? But I gave them tons of flexibility in how they were doing that. And the students went wild with it. That discussion was probably the best one I've ever had on Kipling, right? So we're looking at the relationship between 19th century imperialism and some of the stuff that people think, oh, are pretty good today, and looking at some of the problems with that. And so it was a really interesting discussion because I was giving the students flexibility. Right here, they didn't have to read all of this. I said, okay, you want to read this, but there's lots of other stuff I want you to read. There's some stuff below it too. I want you to read a couple selections from there and really kind of pick and discuss and look at it from your own perspective. Pick the stuff you want to look at and then talk about it in class. And the students were forming their own opinions. One student even thought Kipling was an anti-imperialist. he was totally wrong. He had really good reason. He was kind of looking at it as a Jonathan Swift, like it was all satire. But it was a really interesting argument. But then we had a really good discussion about Kipling. We had a really good discussion about NGO movements, about neo-imperialism. It was a really fruitful discussion in class that it was giving him lots of flexibility within these constraints. So that's the first project, right? There's more flexibility. It's not just 2 readings on Cavour and Napoleon III and some diplomatic history. It's much broader, and there's lots of constraints within that. So I thought, hey, this worked out really well. Let's try it again. Let's try something with a little bit more oomph, a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more openness. And so I had the Colonial Advertising project. So I wanted to talk to students about ways that advertising informed popular understandings of empire in the 19th and 20th century. Right? So advertising is really important to how we understand the world around us, how we think about, oh, what's really stylish? Oh, wow, those, Seiko watches or Air Jordans. Or what's really a good car? Ooh, Lexus or Mercedes, right? Those ideas, those opinions are formed through advertising. Same with the 19th century as well. This wasn't just invented in the 1950s in Madison Avenue, New York. This is stuff that's been going around for a while, and empire was often promoted in advertising for things like biscuits, tea, chocolate, Imperial Airways for the British, the airline companies. So advertisement was very much a way that ideas of empire were propagated in the 19th and 20th century. So what I was doing then is I said, okay, I want students to seek and find. I want them to seek out examples of imperial advertising or advertisements that featured imperial projects or imperial ideas. And I want them to seek and find. I want them to seek those, find them out, and then in a group, discuss them. So I was going to give let's see. Okay, so with their poster, so what they're supposed to do is they're find a poster or advertisement, talk about what the poster was. They had an essay they had to do as a group. What was being sold, chocolate, tea, airlines. How colonialism was used to sell the product, what ideas or stereotypes were being perpetrated or perpetuated. And then I wanted them in this bonus for the group with the best advertisement. I wanted to tell them why it was the best example of imperialism. So they had to form an argument or an opinion about that advertisement itself. And so there, again, get them invested in it. And so then all advertisements were going to be briefly discussed and presented in class. Right? And that part I want you to really keep in mind. We're going to discuss it in class. So the project featured freedom within constraints. There's a lot more freedom. They could select any one they wanted, any advertisement they wanted from, I said 1870 to 1939, and gave numerous tips. So I really emphasized, okay, this is how you can look for these examples. So I talked about what companies frequently employed empire in advertising. So Cadbury chocolate, soap companies, Lipton tea. Then I talked about where to get copies. I gave them examples of where to get these copies of the prints, and then how to search for them on Google. So I gave search parameters that they could use on Google to find these things. So I did a lot of research beforehand to walk the students through and to give them a good instruction of where they're going to find this material. The results were amazing. I was blown away. I thought the Kipling discussion was good. This was superfluously nice. So these are this is an example of one of the projects they had. Does anyone recognize the gentleman in the picture? Of course you don't. None of my students knew who he was. They barely knew who Bono and Sting were from the video. So this is Joseph Chamberlain. He was the colonial secretary around the turn of the 19th century. He was hugely influential in British circles. His nephew was Neville Chamberlain, who we do recognize, the prime minister right before World War II. So this is Joseph Chamberlain, hugely influential as an advocate for welfare for the working class. You can see he's dressed rather dapperly. He was an industrialist. I think it was just made nuts and bolts, but he made millions of pounds off of nuts and bolts. And he became colonial secretary to boot. But my students researched all of this. Right? They told me who that gentleman was right there, who the target audience for colonial crackers was. It was the upper and middle classes. What all those shields were around the edges, which you can't really see. here, but you can see, okay, this is New Zealand, there's Canada. These were the Dominion, the white dominions, the colonies that were white dominated in the British Empire in the 19th century. And they basically dissected, okay, why are those there? Why are they associated with Joseph Chamberlain? Well, Joseph Chamberlain had this grand idea of creating a United States of the British Empire. And he said the only way the British Empire is going to stay around is if we unite all the white dominions into one political body. Didn't work out, but he was an advocate for that right when this advertisement was being pumped out. And my students were talking about all this here, and they were talking about it in the class as well. So they really dived into who this person was, how they're using empire to promote and to sell crackers. Right? They were doing a lot more research than if I would have just said, I want you to read this diplomatic history between Cavour and Napoleon III. Right? I just gave them two things. They dived in a lot deeper. They did research, not always the best. There are some sources sometimes in some of the other articles that weren't the best, but we had a chance to talk about that. Did you have a question?
Yeah, were most of them just sort of 3 concise paragraphs like this one?
This was one. This was one of them. I have another example. So this is the next example that I had. And this is another colonial advertisement for Pierre's soap. A soap was often frequently used in colonial advertising because soap was often used as a colonial legitimizer. Right? So the British Empire goes out to the world and says, we need to colonize these people. Well, the British back home are going to say, why? And they're going to say, aha, because we're going to civilize them. We're going to bring them technology. We're going to bring them hygiene. And the soap companies were, soap, hygiene, we can sell this. So frequently soap companies were the worst in terms of using imperialism, racism to promote empire and to promote their product at the same time. Right? Because it's part of the civilizing mission of the 19th century. It's Kipling's responsibility, the white man's burden. And the students found this advertisement. It's a classic. So Pierre's soap, so the British child gives this black child a bar of soap and says, aha, you can clean yourself. But not only does Pierre's soap get the dirt off you, it gets the black off you. That's how powerful it is. Right? The idea here is that you can civilize Africans through soap, through hygiene, right? They're still going to be Africans. Their head's not clean, right? Their mind. But you can still bring this civilization to them. My students wrote this. This was just a week assignment, right? They went everywhere with this. They went overboard. Again, I think there's some more sources that they had underneath. But they not only pointed out the racism within this, the problems, what was going on, but they also said, hey, this is not only, they aren't just inventing this picture. This is from an old Greek fable about the Ethiopian slave and the Greek master, right? They're bringing out like how this advertisement was not only referring to contemporary notions of imperialism, and it was also heralding back to centuries of tradition in European culture. Right? I never knew that. I've seen that advertisement of the black child and the white child tons of times. Right? It's a classic. But they really dug into what was going on with it. Because I was giving them the freedom to kind of research this, to look into it, to really get interested in it. And I was also adding a little bit of incentive in terms of the competition. Well, let's think about, does that answer your question? Okay. All right. All right, John. So the little bit of reflection. So I was finding that students were working harder for each other than for me. Because again, I told them, we're going to discuss your project in class. There's 8 projects. Each of them, I put them on the spot. And I said, okay, we're going to talk about this picture. So in class, when we discussed it, we went through each picture and we talked about it. And they had to be able to discuss it. So they worked harder for each other than me. Plus, they had the online discussion as well, when they're each reading each other's stuff. Balancing freedom with constraints really encouraged the students' buy-in. At least I was reading the literature, and these were examples that I thought were really kind of demonstrating that. But I didn't overwhelm them, because again, I was saying, okay, this is where you can go get these posters, right? This is how you can search for Google on it. These are some examples of companies that use imperialism within their advertising, right? So I was giving them lots of constraints, but I was giving them freedom, considerable freedom within that. And then sorry, to go back here, to pop back up, working harder for each other. Again, this is also a competition, right? So they are also trying to outdo each other a little bit. I gave them just a nominal extra credit on their quiz scores, which are kind of, they're having some problems with some of their quizzes. So I gave them some extra credit. So it's a competition.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I have no idea. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Love technology.
That's right. The in-class discussion, in many ways, was the payoff for me. I was able to use, so it was an online activity, right? They just mostly did this in groups online. They had some discussion online, right? Discussion online was much better because they were using the discussion part to basically advocate for their own poster, right? So they were using some really good examples in that. So it was the best online discussion I had. But really being able to discuss back and forth in class was much better. Plus, really, the feedback. This is a superior venue for feedback, right? So when you give feedback on a project, it's often maybe 2 or 3 sentences, right? Paragraph if you're being super generous. Right? Here, I was able to go through line by line of their discussion if they had a problem with it. We were able to interact and talk much more openly and much more freely. And I was able to give a lot more valuable feedback as a result. So if we remember, let's see, backwards is this way. This poster right here, this was the winning submission, and the one before that was the second best. But their essay had lots of flaws in it, right? Some of the resources that they were searching out were problematic. I was like, this isn't an academic resource. You can't use this in a paper. But we were able to talk about that, right? And the students were able to kind of push back against me. He's like, oh no, but I found this here. And this was, this guy is a doctorate. It's like, yeah, doctorate from where? And why is he writing in a blog versus this is, you need to be looking over here. And I was saying that's not necessarily bad for what we're doing here, but we need to look into that for the future. So I was able to give a lot more detailed feedback, a lot more focused feedback, and able to make it conversational and allow other students to kind of take part in that as well. So I found that really discussing it in class really allowed me to kind of wrap up the entire assignment and to really kind of let students kind of see what they're doing well, what they're doing incorrectly, and also everyone to learn from each other and from each other's mistakes.